Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots Monday Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news shows so that you don't have to. This week, our host, Katie Halper, is away, so filling in, we are very excited to be joined by Kate Willett. She is a comedian, a writer, and the co-host of the podcast, Reply Guys. Hello, Kate.
Hello. Nice to be here with you.
How excited are you for an hour of back-to-back Sunday morning news shows clips?
Well, I mean, usually I do, 6 to 7 hours back to back. So, this is a bit of a downgrade for me, but
I'm
okay,
sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we're really, this is, I'm sorry for that. Well, hopefully you can contain your disappointment and help us get through this hour. Although I know 6 hours will be much more preferable. So thank you for making that sacrifice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Well, thank you. So, and thanks everyone for joining us. We really appreciate you having us here. A reminder to, we really appreciate having you here. A reminder to hit the like button. For some reason, that's good for us. Helps our self-esteem, among other things. So please hit the like. And this week, look, we have to say that a lot of the Sunday news shows were dominated by the news out of Buffalo, covering the massacre there. We don't have any clips from that because there's just nothing funny to say about it. That, of course, is another tragedy. It underscores the problem of white supremacy and gun violence in this country. And the Sunday news shows did a pretty good job actually covering it. So we didn't find much to say about it. But that I just want to acknowledge that was a major part of this week's shows that we're not going to be covering this week on Monday morning, because what really is there to say, or at least there's nothing much to make fun of there when it comes to how the Sunday news shows covered it. So
not at all funny.
No.
Yeah.
No. But luckily the Sunday shows gave us a whole bunch of other great material. So let's kick it off with Pete Buttigieg. He is the Secretary of Transportation, and he came on Face the Nation to talk about another crisis in this country, which is the absence of baby formula.
It's going to be an issue Congress takes up this week. I know the president said more action's coming, but this has been ongoing for months. There were supply chain issues already. Then you have the issue with this one plant, Abbott, whistleblower in September, February, the recall. It's May. Why has it taken so long? And why did the president on Friday seem to say that it was new information to him? He said, if we'd been better mind readers, I guess we could have done something earlier.
Well, look, the administration acted from day one after the recall, taking steps like creating more flexibility for the WIC program to help rebalance the availability of formula in the states. There are more actions that are underway, including looking at imports. But fundamentally, we are here because a company was not able to guarantee that its plant was safe, and that plant has shut down.
But that is the federal government's job as regulators to help ensure
as
safety
regulators,
of the
yes,
plant.
But let's be very clear. This is a capitalist country. The government does not make baby formula, nor should it. Companies make formula. And one of those...
You hear that? So this is a capitalist country, Kate. And if capitalism means that babies have to go without formula because a company won't make a profit if they do make that formula, then so be it. That's just how it has to be.
Well, it's kind of funny because if you just edited out the nor should it be, if you just edited out the part where Pete says that he doesn't think that the government should make baby formula, like this would be like you could ostensibly say that Pete Buttigieg is making an argument for socialism or communism. Like, yes, this is just going to happen in capitalism. This is just part of this will occur. And it's, yes, Katie looks different, but we have a similar name. But yeah, I don't know. It is remarkably callous, I would say, his attitude here. And he's usually pretty good at faking empathy.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're saying this is a capitalist country in explaining the absence of baby formula, which keeps babies alive, generally that sounds like a criticism. Like, holy shit, this is a capitalist country. We don't have formula. The government's not making formula to keep babies alive because we've handed it over to companies and they only care about making a profit. So it sounds like you should be making a criticism, but really he's saying this is how it should be.
Yeah, I think that also, I mean, a lot of people have made this point, but I think people are so, I think Democrats like Pete are just so underestimating the political impact of this. Like, nobody's going to forget that time that they couldn't find food for their baby, or it took all day and they were really stressed out the whole time. Yeah, I think that, Pete can be really good at expressing empathy on stuff like he's had some great answers on abortion. Honestly, I'm not like a
Hmm.
Pete stan, of course, but this is a fail, I would say.
Well, maybe baby mothers can get a copy of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations.
Yeah, I mean, Pete also has a baby. It's like he gets the importance of formula. So there we go. Yeah.
Those
Baby
companies, a
bootstraps.
company which, by the way, seems to have 40% market share, messed up and is unable to confirm that a major plant, is safe and free of contamination. So the most important thing to do right now, of course, is to get that plant in Michigan up and running safely. And that's the work that's going on between the company and the FDA. It's got to be safe, and it's got to be up and running as soon as possible. But this is the difference between a supply chain problem, in other words, a problem about moving goods around, and a supply problem, which has to do with whether they're being produced in the first place. Now, the administration's also been working with other companies to try to surge their production. That's led to an increase in production, which is helping to compensate. But at the end of the day, this plant needs to come back online safely.
And the government is working with these companies, but not in a way that would get the government actually involved in making the formula, because that would be a violation of capitalism. We can't have that.
Nationalized baby formula. We should go for it.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Well, thank you, Pete, for maybe Pete's comments will kick off that movement, nationalized baby formula.
Yeah. Base socialist Pete Buttigieg. Yes.
All right. So from baby formula, let's go to another major issue right now. That is the leaked Supreme Court draft ruling that will overturn Roe versus Wade. And the governor of Nebraska is among those who are just lining up. They cannot wait for that decision to come down so that they can immediately outlaw abortion, even in cases of rape or incest. And he was asked about that on CNN.
Final question about Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court appears poised to reverse that. Nebraska, your state, does not have a so-called trigger law on the books, but there was an effort, as you know, to pass one. It failed by only 2 votes last month. The abortion ban that you tried to pass did not include any exceptions for rape or incest. So can you clarify, do you think that the state of Nebraska should require a young girl who was raped to carry that pregnancy to term?
So Nebraska is a pro-life state. I believe life begins at conception, and those are babies too. So if Roe versus Wade, which was a horrible constitutional decision, gets overturned by the Supreme Court, which we're hopeful of, here in Nebraska, we're going to take further steps to protect those preborn babies. Including in the case of rape or incest? They're still babies too, yes, they're still babies.
So if Roe is overruled and overturned, will you call a special session right away to ban abortion in Nebraska?
Well, if we do get that Roe versus Wade overturned, I will work with our Speaker of the Legislature to work on a special session and do more to protect preborn babies. We'll have to wait and see what that decision is before we can take further steps, but that would certainly be my intention.
Pretty gross.
What to say about people like that? That's just crazy.
So
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say what a trigger law, in case anyone doesn't know. So a trigger law is, a lot of states have them on the books, which means that they're laws that explicitly say that as soon as Roe versus Wade is struck down, that abortion will immediately be illegal. So the states have been preparing for this contingency, and he's saying Nebraska hasn't passed one of those, so they're going to have to have a special session immediately, which of course they will do.
And it's like he just can't contain his excitement to do it. what
It's
gets
so
me is
disgusting.
what a top priority this is for people to in states like this to pass a law. Even in the case of rape or incest, it's like 2022, and it feels like these people belong in a different century, you know. But yet
Yeah,
they're
I
on
mean,
TV.
it's just so disgusting. I think I mean there's both like a lot to say about this and not much to say about it. The not much to say about it is obviously this is disgusting, it is amoral, it is unpopular, it is fascistic. I mean, I think that like with the rape or incest bans, like or the rape or incest exceptions, like obviously it's viscerally disgusting that they are not having these exceptions, but I have a lot of doubt that even if exceptions are written into these laws, that it will actually, like, that means that you have to go before a judge and prove that qualify for this exception, and for how little women are believed in sexual assault cases in the first place. Like, even that is not going to be that helpful. So if you care
Yeah.
about abortion being legal in cases of rape and incest, you have to support abortion being fully legal, because the exceptions are not going to work. But it is so disgusting that he's willing to explicitly say it.
And I'm sure even like the very act of having to go before a judge, that will be enough to deter people not to do it, because who wants to go through that process of trying to justify to a judge why, if you've suffered rape or incest, why you deserve an abortion. I mean, like that alone, I'm sure will be enough to turn many people who've experienced that off, right? Because
Yeah, and I mean, especially like, in the cases of incest, a lot of the time, these are minors that are pregnant and still living at home with their parents, one of whom may be their abuser. So, I mean, it's just, I think that this is the no exceptions for rape or incest. It's like it's just open contempt for women. Obviously more people than just women can get pregnant, but I do think these laws have a misogynistic tone to them. That's the point. But it's it's really gross. It's really, really, really gross to go on TV and say that you want to force people to carry incest babies.
Well, luckily, standing up for choice are the Democrats, who of course are going to make everything better. And here to explain that, we have House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who was asked about this on Sunday.
Many Democrats are angry. I know you're one of them. A lot of people in the grassroots are despondent over this draft ruling. And one reason why they're upset is because conservatives have played the long game here. You know this. They have said over and over for decades that this was their goal, to overturn Roe v. Wade, and that Democratic leaders should have seen this coming. I'm sure you've heard this too.
No, I mean, the point is who would have ever suspected that a creature like Donald Trump would become president of the United States, waiving a list of judges that he would appoint, therefore getting the support of the far right, and appointing those.
Who would have suspected that
Who would have suspected
a Republican like Trump could become president? That's the whole sales pitch of every single Democratic election campaign is vote for us, or else the Republicans will come in and abortion rights and amongst other calamities, right? That's their whole sales pitch. That's all they talk about every time.
Yeah, I mean, also it's like, she's making this about, Trump's personality and his rudeness, but George W. Bush and every other Republican since, Reagan has been trying to do the exact same thing. And it's not like, I mean, they have all these plans written down, it's like the Heritage Foundation and this conservative legal movement. I mean, they're like, yes, we're going to do this. This is how we're going to do it. You don't have to be Clarice Starling to crack this case.
And Trump, who I'm sure in his personal life I think it's a safe bet, has had many abortions.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he's on tape bragging about it at some point.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
So it's like funny to like paint him as like the brainchild of the anti-choice movement. Anyway, all right, back to Nancy.
Freedom justices to the court. So this is not about long game. We played a long game. We won Roe v. Wade a long time ago. We voted to protect it over time. We have elected a Democratic House of Representatives that is pro-choice. Again, you have 60-vote thing in the Senate. And some lack of clarity on part of some of the Republicans who say they're pro-choice and then vote against a woman's right to choose. But it isn't, let's not take our eye off the ball. The ball is this court, which is dangerous to the freedoms of our country. Beware in terms of marriage equality, beware in terms of other aspects of it. And so it is, let's not waste our time on that. The fact is, this is a dangerous court to families, to freedom in our country. And that is why people have to mobilize. My saying is, we don't agonize, we organize. We go out there and make sure people know that if they, actually, elections have consequences.
So what impact will this have?
Isn't the point, though, when it comes to Democrats and voting, when she says, like, we voted to defend abortion, isn't the point that they didn't when they had both houses of Congress under Obama, where Obama said this was going to be a top priority to codify Roe v. Wade into law, and then they didn't? They just punted on that?
Yeah, I mean, so the other day they tried to, I'm putting it in huge bunny air quotes, but like the other day they tried to pass a bill that would make abortion federally legal, so all 50 states, and they failed because of Joe Manchin. That is the explanation. But it's like they also didn't do it when they had the supermajority. So right now they're trying to campaign on, we'll do it if we have the supermajority, if we get the 60 votes, filibuster proof. But I don't know how far this is going to carry them, because I think more people than ever before can accurately see, no, wait, there is stuff that you could do and you're not doing it, yet you're campaigning on it.
And even if they get the supermajority, I'm sure they'll find some other excuse to not do it. Be like, oh, we also need we need a super duper majority. That's what we need. Okay, the supermajority is not enough.
Yeah, it's it's also just like a supermajority that's not going to happen. Like, it's, if you look at the, not to be like, look at the map, but like there's no way that is going to happen. So there needs to be another plan of some kind, which I would say, like, Bernie's been advocating for getting rid of the filibuster. And the downside of getting rid of the filibuster is that it won't be there to protect when Republicans are back in power. But Republicans are going to nuke the filibuster anyway. They're already starting to talk about that, to do a national abortion ban, which is for sure the next step of this movement. It has, it doesn't have, banning abortion fully everywhere, it doesn't have support of like voters, like in a, if you poll this, it's really unpopular, but that doesn't matter, because to a section of the base of the Republican Party, this is their most galvanizing issue. And like, this is, that's like the primary thing that Republicans use to get votes, even though they're not doing shit for the people that they say that, they want to help, the working class or whatever, which is completely pretend.
Have on the midterms.
What's his name did? Well, I would hope that we could have some resolution of it before. We'd rather have it resolved rather than an issue for a campaign, because we're talking about a woman's decision-making, her family, her God, her doctor, her own decision-making. So we have to fight the fight on the issue now. I think that it would have an impact on the elections, but right now I want everyone to just focus on what this does and what this means to you. Well, and I say this as a practicing devout Catholic, 5 children in 6 years in 1 week. I don't disrespect people's views and how they want to live their lives. But I don't think that it's up to the Donald Trump appointees on the court or any politicians to make that decision for women. And I'll just say what I've been saying for decades. Understand this. This is not just about terminating a pregnancy. This is about contraception, family planning. They have been against it. They've told me, some of my Republican colleagues, we're not for any family planning domestically or internationally when we've tried to get rid of the gag rule and things like that. So this is as personal as it gets. All politics is local, Tip. This politics is very personal.
She is right about one thing, which is that they will come for birth control. That may be mainstream or it may be pretty fringe, but there are definitely people in the Republican Party already talking about that. It's very unfortunate that she's out there campaigning for an anti-abortion Democrat right now, Henry Cuellar.
That's right. Yeah. Off to a great start in defending abortion rights by endorsing an anti-choice candidate over a pro-choice candidate. All right, let's move on to Bernie Sanders. He was on Meet the Press, which is one of the few times during the year when one of these Sunday news shows interviews a progressive. So Bernie Sanders was asked, I think actually a pretty good question about Build Back Better, because remember Build Back Better? That was like a thing for a bit. That we were going to change the nation with this historic legislation. And then Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema said no. And then it kind of went away. And this week, Chuck Todd actually asked, I think, a pretty good question. Like, okay, if we're not going to get the entire thing, why not just get some of it? Like, why not basically pass or try to approve the provisions of Build Back Better? Like, for example, the child tax credit individually. And that's a good question. So let's hear what Bernie Sanders had to say.
Okay, everything you said there was being addressed in Build Back Better. Okay, it wasn't as big as you wanted it. It was too big for some. But why do we have nothing? Right? That is the head scratcher here. Understand you don't have it all. Why is it zero? Why is there nothing?
It's actually a really good question. You had this massive, gigantic bill, and all it took was basically Joe Manchin to say, no, I'm not passing it. And then it was it. So it's like the question is, so, okay, like, why not make Joe Manchin and Sinema and the Republicans vote on every single item individually? Like, vote on whether or not you want to give food to children and after school programs to children, have them vote against that, challenge them on it. And the answer is that Bernie, I hate to say it, he caved along with Biden, and they didn't do that. They just let Joe Manchin and Sinema hold it up, and then that was the end of it. But they should be putting out there, they should be going out there putting all these items to a line-by-line vote. That's what I think.
I agree 100%.
Let's hear what Bernard says.
Well, it should not be a head scratcher. You got 2 members of the Senate, Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema, who have sabotaged what the president has been fighting for.
That's a strong word, sabotage.
Well, you help me out with a better word here. You got 48 members of the Senate who wanted to go forward with an agenda that helped working families, that was prepared to take on the wealthy and the powerful. You got a president who wanted to do that. You had 2 people who prevented us from doing that. You have a better word than sabotage? That's fine, but I think that is the right word. And I think pressure has got to be put on the part of people in West Virginia, in Arizona, to say, you know what, why don't you stand up for ordinary Americans, not just your wealthy campaign contributors? Why don't you have the guts to take on the drug companies and the insurance companies and the fossil fuel industry? And I think we have got to go and take that agenda that you indicated. It's what the American people want. Do the American people think it makes sense that some of the wealthiest people in this country pay 0 in federal income tax? Of course they don't. 0. Corporate, large corporations making billions pay 0 in federal income tax. We have got to have the guts to go forward with an agenda that shows the American people what we're trying to do. You're going to have no Republicans supporting us. Let the American people see the difference between those who are fighting for working families and those who are not.
First of all, I wish we could see Bernie and Chuck duke it out over a better word than sabotage. see what Chuck has to come up with, because they got pretty animated about that. Do you have a better word? Do you have a better word than sabotage? But look, Bernie, I do think that there's actually a legit point from Chuck here. It's like, why not just force them to vote on all these provisions? It was why do it the Joe Biden way, which is dreaming about making some like secret accommodation, some backroom deal in a darkened room in Capitol Hill? No, that's not how you do it. Fight them. Bring these provisions up for a vote, and that could actually help the Democrats during the election, and seeing all these Republicans vote against all these policies that the U.S. public more or less supports. When it comes to increasing social programs, there's a lot of really good things in Build Back Better, and not doing that, I think, lets Joe Manchin and the Republicans get away with sabotaging a lot of really helpful provisions.
Yeah, Bernie is willing to name and shame Manchin and Sinema in a way that Biden is not. And I appreciate that. Like riling people up in West Virginia and Arizona is, if Bernie were the president, I have no doubt that he would be doing that. And Biden is definitely not going to. But, I have to think that Bernie on some level understands that the reason that this didn't happen, these individual provisions, is because this stuff wasn't actually important to the Biden administration. And that, Manchin and Sinema are kind of an excuse. But I don't know, because Bernie's like, Bernie seems to have a very authentic, personal faith that Joe Biden wants to make things better. That honestly does just seem like a blindness that exists because of their friendship. I don't really see another explanation for it.
Bernie seems like a very good friend. Such a good friend that during the primary, he wouldn't criticize Joe Biden's obvious corruption, like his son Hunter getting a lucrative energy company seat in Ukraine after Joe Biden helped back a coup there. So Bernie's a great friend.
Yeah.
As a fighter, that means that he's going to be a little bit constrained, and it's too bad, because given the pulpit that he has. And by the way, we should mention, nowhere this week at all on the Sunday news shows was there any discussion of the U.S. Sending more weapons to Ukraine. The House just approved overwhelmingly $40 billion, most of it going to weapons contractors. This is after they approved the Lend-Lease Act, which basically speeds up the transfer of U.S. military hardware to Ukraine. And all of this creates a huge windfall for the U.S. weapons industry, which now has to not only gets new contracts to send weapons to Ukraine, it gets new contracts to backfill and replenish the U.S. stockpile to make up for the weapons that are being sent to Ukraine. So it's a bonanza, but yet it wasn't even on the Sunday news shows this week. And that's especially tragic, I think, because Democrats are lining up 100% to support it. Like in the House, it was 57 votes against. All of them were from the Republicans. 0 members of the squad voted against this bill. And I think that needs to at least be discussed, especially since a lot of members of the squad and other progressives were only recently voicing concerns about all this and saying we shouldn't be sending more weapons to Ukraine. We should be pushing for diplomacy, but that's now just off the table.
Yeah, definitely among, mainstream liberals, certainly every elected Democrat, certainly most of the media, there's just unwavering and unquestioned support for more weapons. But I do think that for voters, for people who, are not explicitly like super into the Democratic Party, that there are like a lot of, just run-of-the-mill people that are like, wait a minute, we have $40 billion to spend on weapons, and I'm running around to 5 different towns to try to get food for my baby. And I actually think that people do notice that stuff. And I hate the Republicans, and I think that it is unfortunate that they are the ones making that point, obviously cynically and to evil ends. I just want to say, I hate Marjorie Taylor Greene, but I think it's a mistake to have her be the one that's talking about that.
I agree. I agree. Marjorie Taylor Greene sounding more sensible on Ukraine than any member of the squad, I think. And that's just crazy. It's crazy to be ceding that lane to MAGA Republican. It's nuts. Well, look, here's where our friend Chuck Todd at Meet the Press is a step ahead of us, because while we're focused on the current war in Ukraine, where the U.S. is every day deepening its involvement with billions of dollars of more in weapons to be sent over to fight Russia in a proxy war, Chuck Todd and Meet the Press are thinking about the next war. And to help us out with that, they even simulated a war game, not with Russia, but with another adversary, which is China. And let's watch this crazy clip.
Welcome back. In our final episode of this season's Meet the Press Reports, we put together a remarkable war game simulation of how the U.S. might react if China invaded Taiwan. The National Security Think Tank Center for a New American Security, or CNAS, convened two teams. The blue team representing the United States and the red team representing China. Which side would prevail? Would China attack the U.S. mainland? Could nuclear war break out? The conflict takes place in 2027. There are 3 rounds of strategy, and I spoke to the game master after each round to see where the conflict stood. Here's a look.
Okay, so let's just pause for a second. We're used to, U.S. corporate networks shilling for current wars, right? And manufacturing consent for whatever the propaganda needs are of the current war going on, or a war that the U.S. wants to do, like in the run-up to the Iraq War. But this is next level. This is NBC News partnering with a neocon think tank, and we'll talk more about it, the Center for New American Security, to simulate a future war and even getting a game going to game out how it's going to go. Like last week on the show, we covered CBS's Face the Nation interviewing the CEO of Lockheed Martin and basically doing like an infomercial for all the new weapons that he wants to see being approved that his company will be paid for. Now we're getting a weapons industry funded think tank to simulate a future war with China.
It's absolutely wild, and it's going to work, which is even worse.
Well, let's watch the game, or some of the game.
As you can see here on the map is a very large concentration of Chinese People's Liberation Army forces at potential ports of debarkation for an invasion.
We want to focus on a last-ditch effort to deter. This is a time to be sending the strongest possible message to Beijing, both privately and publicly, that there will be very severe costs if they actually go through with this.
China has sort of seen our reaction to Ukraine, and we want to make sure that we're surprising them with how we react here.
Hit the Americans as hard as we possibly can in the Western Pacific, keep them out of the fight while we move on Taiwan.
I would support an early knockout punch against Guam.
The priority for the first 24 hours is to try to go as fast as possible against Taipei, right? I think it matters to deter United States, Japan, Australia, and other countries from intervening.
All right, Stacey, high level here. What just happened with Move 1?
China's invaded Taiwan. It began by attacking Taiwan's outlying islands near the mainland. Then it followed it with a large air and missile strike on Taiwan and on...
Imagine someone just tuning into this halfway and they don't realize that this is like a simulated game. And so here people on the screen be like, yep, China has just attacked Taiwan and the U.S. is repositioning its forces. Someone be like, oh my God, we're going to war with China. Oh my God, the world's going to end. But really, it's just a bunch of think tank employees playing a war game broadcast on the top Sunday morning news show.
Yeah, it's like, so I've talked to a lot of people about Ukraine, and, I think that the attitude among most people is still like, oh yeah, like our military can basically, if we don't like something that's happening in the world, or even something that is like legitimately, objectively bad. Like I think that Putin's invasion of Ukraine is horrible, but I think people are really continually overestimating like what the American military actually can do. Look, we just pulled out of Afghanistan. We were there for like 20 years and Taliban's still in power. This like idea that like, oh yeah, we're just going to go in and it's going to be easy and we'll just do this and that. Like it's never been true. And these neocon think tanks and politicians just, continually like promote this idea of just like, yeah, bam, 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 we're going to kill the bad guys. And it never works like that.
And isn't it crazy that like there are people who get paid a lot of money and, wear fancy suits and have like a nice office in Washington, D.C. to essentially like play dress up, right? That's basically what they're doing here. It's like neocon dress up. They're like sitting around simulating a war game that could lead to a nuclear holocaust, and it's considered totally normal. When really this is like, this is what kids do. Then there's board games like, what's it called? Is it Risk? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, exactly.
No,
it's Risk. Yeah.
But they carry fancy titles like senior fellow for blah 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 blah. But it's like this is basically what the think tank world is. It's like neocon dress up.
Is it one of the main lessons? Like, isn't I don't know if it's Risk or whatever, but I think one of the takeaways that people always say for Risk is never have a land war in Asia. I think, isn't that like
they got to play some
game?
Risk.
I don't know.
Yeah. Get these people in front of a Risk board ASAP.
Yeah.
U.S. bases in Japan and on U.S. bases in Guam and the Northern Marianas. In response to that, the United States followed up with bomber attacks on on Chinese ships in port, and there was an air battle over Taiwan where American aircraft.
Again, just put like a caption to say this is simulated. This is not actually happening. You know what I mean? Because somebody tuning in will be like, "Will think we're in the midst of a nuclear war." I mean, that is a trigger.
Nuts.
If ever a trigger warning is needed, that's it right there.
A nuclear trigger warning.
Flying from the Philippines came in and engaged in combat with Chinese aircraft that were trying to bomb Taiwan.
So after move one, can you assess which team is winning?
If you want to find out what the winning move was, and I'm sure you do, check out Meet the Press Reports wherever you get NBC News Now.
Oh,
Welcome
I definitely want to find out who. I definitely want to find out who won. I can't wait.
I mean, it's just like the idea that they think that they can predict what will happen based on this simulator when, like, nobody has been able to. I remember shock and awe in the Iraq War. It's just like, oh yeah, we're just gonna just take care of it, and it's. I don't know. Like, these people, like, more than anything else, they're like selling the idea that like war is easy and we can just accomplish our objectives and we know what's going to happen. And it
if a team of grown adults wearing suits in a conference room in DC can win a board game, then basically don't worry about nuclear holocaust. Then everything's going to be okay.
Exactly.
If we can do it in our office, in our air-conditioned office, then don't worry about it. Everything's going to be fine. Well, look, what they never mention on any of these shows when they talk about these think tanks is if they have some sort of authority and are unbiased, is who actually funds these think tanks. So, Wilson, let's pull up the page that shows the funders of the Center for New American Security, which, by the way, it's just crazy. A news organization is partnering up with a think tank. It's just so funny. I mean, sometimes you interview these people and pretend as if they're serious, but this is like an outright partnership to play a very dangerous board game. So let's look at who
very
actually
dangerous
funds,
board game. Yeah,
a very dangerous board. Let's look at who actually funds the Center for a New American Security. So at the 500,000 and above level, the top donor there is a scrappy company called Northrop Grumman, one of the top weapons manufacturers in the country. And then we have coming in also at the 500,000 and above level, the Pentagon. Okay, so that's those are the top donors. And we go down more to the 100,000 to 250,000 level. We have the great guys at Amazon, wonderful people there. We also have the Koch Institute. We have what else? Eric and Wendy Schmidt. That's the Eric Schmidt being the CEO of Google. The European Union's in there. The great guys at Facebook. All the great people there at Facebook. Google. We have Microsoft, Palantir. That's Peter Thiel. Raytheon.
Oh my god!
And then coming in again, just not to be outdone, the Pentagon again. At a
different branch of the Pentagon,
different level, yeah. That's so generous of the Pentagon. Really diversifying its portfolio here, coming in at two different.
Yeah, it's like it's like how people who sometimes have like step parents, they get more presents in the holidays. This is like what the Pentagon is. That's the Pentagon's step family.
And at the lower level of 50,000 to 100,000, we have Boeing, we have Booz Allen, another major weapons contractor. And so, yeah, I mean, anyway, that's who the Center for National Security is. So, of course, they have an interest in simulating war and promoting war with China, because that's what their donors profit off of. But why a purported news organization feels compelled to go along with that is beyond me.
Yeah, and why people, pretty much just take it as like real information. I didn't know what all of those funders are, but I do know that like whenever something says whenever something seems super benign, like fund for friends and democracy or whatever, it's almost always, when you Google it, like the most evil war promoting shit.
Well, I want to see more games. I want to see video games between think tank fellows, somebody representing, I don't know, like the Putin team and someone representing the Biden team. See what happens there, because that will give us a lot of insight into the outcome of World War III, really, is who can win. And let's get Ultimate Frisbee going too. I mean, like,
I actually just want to see yeah, it would be fun if they played this game, all the way to the end. It's after the nuclear war, there's like 25 people left, and then they're gaming out, how those 21 people will, find like a can of beans that isn't affected by, radiation somewhere that's in a basement. And I just want to see, like, I want to see them get to the Cormac McCarthy level of this game. Yeah.
Well, maybe we'll get that in a future episode of Meet the Press. There's
yeah, that would be fun. I would watch.
Yeah, I'd watch that too. I definitely watch that. All right. Well, that was crazy. And what are they going to come up with next? Again, last week they gave us, and we covered this on last week's Monday morning, just a straight up like infomercial with the head of Lockheed Martin, where he's just giving his wish list of all the measures he wants Congress to pass. And the only questions from the host, Margaret Brennan, was like, okay, so how quickly can you get this done? Like, and what more can we do for you? It's basically just like it was like a consultancy / infomercial for Lockheed Martin. So let's see what they come up with next week in trying to manufacture consent for a nuclear holocaust. It's a really exciting time to be watching these Sunday news shows. All right. So, okay. Another major story this week, and this week there was so much awful news. It was a tough news cycle. Was the murder by Israel of a journalist covering the occupied West Bank. It was caught on camera. There is horrific footage of it, and that is awkward for the U.S. media, which so consistently covers up for Israel and whitewashes Israeli war crimes. And the journalist's name is Shireen Abu Akleh. She was laid to rest in East Jerusalem, and there was footage on top of the footage of her killing by Israel. There's footage of Israeli forces attacking people at the funeral, people holding her coffin, beating them. So Brian Stelter, fan favorite of the show, brought on an Israeli official to discuss what happened. So yes, it is Stelter time. Brian Stelter claims that he invited somebody from Al Jazeera and that they did not want to come on. That's what he says. But so instead, he gave considerable airtime to an Israeli official to basically whitewash the killing and the Israeli response to the funeral. So let's watch a clip of that.
The story in the middle.
Tell me why.
Because in the last month, 19 Israelis were brutally murdered in terror attacks, not as journalists covering a war zone in conflict, but just sitting in their cars, having beers, walking in the parks, just for being Jewish and living in Israel. And we had to go into Jenin to try and prevent the next terror attack coming out of it, and that is the raid in which, at the end, in the fire shots, Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, which is again a tragedy. We don't know who from. We were seeing central media, social media, politicians in the United States and all over the world claiming it's Israel before we had any proof of it. While the Palestinian corner said We've examined the bullet. It's too close to call. We don't know yet. We still had media outlets and American elected officials saying and blaming Israel. And the fact that Al Jazeera is blaming Israel, I take that in a certain proportion. Al Jazeera, people need to be reminded sometimes. It's not free media like CNN is free media. It's state-owned media. It's the Qatari national media outlet. It's like Russia Today. Russia Today has been used in the last month to explain the Russian side of the war and to call Zelensky a Nazi. And it's the kind of media that we need to take into in the right perspective when we analyze what they say.
I also think Al Jazeera has some excellent journalists.
I think they have some excellent journalists. I think she was an excellent journalist. It's a tragedy, but everyone thinks it's a tragedy. I think that we need to do everything in our power to make sure that these things don't happen again, but we can't do that alone, and which is why we've been calling from our side, and we've been doing it responsibly. We believe in taking responsibility. We said we don't know who it is.
Right.
Okay, so Israelis are really good at being disingenuous. And know what he does there. He knows that right now the U.S. media is obsessed with Ukraine and bashing Russia in any way. So he somehow invokes Russia Today RT as a reason to believe that Al Jazeera, whatever it says, is not trustworthy because both are state-owned media. As if whatever he thinks about Russia Today or whatever Brian Stelter thinks about Russia Today, is if that has anything to do with Israel's occupation of Palestine and Israel's murder of a journalist with Al Jazeera. So he's playing on, basically Russiagate derangement syndrome to try to whitewash his own government's atrocities. And Brian Stelter gives a little bit of pushback, but not really because it's Brian Stelter. And okay, so we have another clip, which I'm going to have to play from here. So just bear with me for a second. Let's see here if I can do it. Okay.
A conflict zone. It is.
Okay, here we go. All right. So this guy's on a roll because Brian Stelter's not really challenging him. So look what he comes up with next.
It is a conflict zone. It is not a one-sided conflict zone. It is a conflict zone because terror comes out of it. It is a conflict zone because people use schools and the AP building and other places, things we would never do.
But what about the funeral on Friday?
So just 1 second. So he's trying to say that, remember a year ago when Israel bombed a building inside Gaza that was used by the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, by the way, leveled it. And they claimed it was being used by Hamas to fire rockets, or whatever, which of course there was zero evidence for. And in fact, all the intelligence that came out was essentially concocted. So he asserts that here as fact, and Brian Stelter, of course, doesn't challenge it because it's Brian Stelter. But he's just straight up lying there about the AP building inside Gaza.
Wow.
That's what they do. All right, let's hear more.
Israeli police beating mourners with batons. Was that a conflict zone?
In a way, yes. First of all,
let me say this.
The pictures are horrible.
So hear that? He's calling the funeral a conflict zone. In a way, yes. So he's trying to justify attacking a funeral.
I don't want to underestimate the effectiveness of this kind of propaganda, but I'm wondering if in this specific case, I'm thinking about all the awareness that people have gotten in the United States over the past few years of framings like officer involved shooting, or, he was no angel when it comes to the cops, just murdering someone for absolutely no reason. And I'm wondering if that awareness is going to start to apply in these situations. And plus this video of, attacking mourners. I mean, it's so horrific, and there's absolutely no way to, spin this differently. Even this guy can't, so.
Well, he's gonna try. So
yeah, he's trying, but it's not working. Yeah.
The pictures are horrible. I'm not going to defend the pictures, and we are conducting an investigation. And by the way, in the series of things that we do to try to manage this situation, mistakes happen. We're not perfect. I don't think anybody's perfect. And if we have anything to learn from this, we will learn from this. But again, context. This was a funeral that we were in charge of public safety of. It was coordinated, the police forces with the family of Shireen Abu Akleh. And before the funeral started, people came up, tried to take the coffin from the family, tried to run it to a different direction. And the police was there helping the family make sure that what was agreed upon would happen. Then bottles were thrown at police.
Okay, so he's trying to say that the Israeli military was just doing what the family wanted to get the funeral back under control in accordance with the family's wishes. That's not what the family says at all. Her brother, Shireen Abu Akleh's brother, says that that's not true at all. So he's saying that Israel is straight up lying there. And given Israel's record, I'm going to go with the family here. And of course, Brian Stelter's not going to push back on that. But it's like he said before, I'm not going to try to justify it. But here, that's exactly what he's doing.
I mean, it's like, even if let's say you know, obviously this is just an insane set of lies, but is there any situation that, you know, cops beating pallbearers is going to be what the family wants? Like, is there any situation that a family wants their daughters or their sister's coffin drops on the ground at the funeral? No. Like,
and does the family want the occupation force that killed their loved one to be in charge of the funeral? No, they don't want them there. The only reason they're there is because they're an occupying force. So they have no right to even be there to begin with. But that's just, it's presumed that it's legitimate for somehow Israel to police the funeral of one of its victims, because we just accept the Israeli occupation as somehow legitimate when it's not. And that, of course, is the context. They talk about context. That's the context that they'll never, ever give us.
Police officers, it's very hard to show how these pictures come to life. But when they come to life, they're horrible. I agree.
But about stories sometimes starting in the middle and needing to know the beginning of the story, and that's very important. This must not.
That's Brian Stelter. It's like, oh, okay. So the funeral starts in the middle. We need context. So we need to tell the whole story. And the story is defined by what Israeli spokespeople say, not what Palestinians say. And this is crazy. So look what Brian says to him here.
Be the sort of subject that you'd want to be talking about at all.
I'd love to be talking about Israel.
And that's very important. This must not be the sort of subject that you'd want to be talking about at all.
I'd love to.
Isn't that what you always say to a representative of a government who has just killed a journalist? You must not want to be talking about this at all. Doesn't this suck? I'm sorry for even interviewing you about this. I apologize, because you'd rather be doing something else, I'm sure, wouldn't you?
I mean, it's striking because, I mean, like, this is ghoulish on so many levels. And, you know, like, hopefully, you know, for anyone listening to the show, it's a given that, you know, a human life has the exact same amount of worth, no matter what country that person is from. But that being said, I cannot believe that, you know, these media people are willing to talk about the murder of an American citizen and journalists like this. Like, this is like, I mean, you know, it's, I think even like Jamal Khashoggi, people were, you know, like a lot more mad. And it's just, I don't know. It's just really weird that, like, that this is how they'll treat even an American journalist to support Israel's right wing.
Well, let's hear what the Israeli spokesperson would rather be talking about than a journalist who is government murdered.
Be talking about Israeli food and gefilte fish. You know, that's a subject if I had to choose myself. But I think it is important for the world to report responsibly.
And by the way, when he says Israeli food, he means food. He means Palestinian food appropriated by Israel. That's what he means by Israeli food. That's what Israeli food basically is.
Yeah.
Like people, like, you know, like my family in Budapest, my ancestral, they weren't eating hummus. They weren't eating hummus. That's not exactly. Like, you know, they did, you know, East European Jews started eating hummus after they emigrated to Israel and Palestinian land was stolen on their behalf. But when he says Israeli food, that's what he means. He means Palestinian food stolen.
Yeah. I started eating hummus in college.
There we go.
Yeah.
I want to say why. when you talk about anti-Israel sentiment, every time something happens in Israel, no matter what side it happened from, Al Jazeera has 10 journalists that died in the past few years in conflict areas, none of whom were horrible, none of whom were reported as much as this happening in Israel. And people don't understand.
This is a classic Israeli line. Al Jazeera journalists have died elsewhere. Why aren't they being discussed enough? Why aren't they being discussed as loudly as we're currently discussing the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh right now? It's because everyone just hates Jews. Like, that's basically the common thing. Oh, you're talking about the murder of this journalist because you're anti-Semitic. That's the underlying suggestion of every single Israeli defense of their policies. This is just anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism to talk about a murder of a journalist.
Understand that when you automatically blame Israel for things that we haven't done, that turns into anti-Semitic attacks at the end of the day and anti-Semitic sentiments in the United States. And we live in New York City. In New York City, anti-Semitic incidents have quadrupled in the last year. And there's a connection because most of the Jewish people have strong feelings toward Israel, see it as their eternal home. And when you attack that, you attack them, and there is a linkage. And that is why we're not asking for any shortcuts. We're not asking for any discounts, but we are asking for honest reporting about things that happen. We are asking for people to wait for a second before they say Israel is in charge of the killing of a reporter. Maybe we are, and if we are, we need to investigate that. Maybe we're not, but when you assume automatically that we are, that comes from a totally different place in your heart.
To your point about the climate.
It comes from the place of seeing you as an occupying force that's been occupying a people for decades, killing innocent civilians regularly, shooting at journalists. Shireen Abu Akleh is not the first Palestinian journalist to be killed by Israel. There's a long list of them, especially in Gaza in recent years. And so that's the place people are coming from. He's trying to suggest everything comes from a place of anti-Semitism. And Brian Stelter is here to assist that. Listen to the context that Brian Stelter gives here.
Automatically that we are, that comes from a totally different place in your heart.
To your point about the climate, the suspect in Buffalo, this manifesto that was authored, he described himself as an anti-Semite, a racist and anti-Semite. So this climate, it is very, it needs to be seen in totality. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.
All right, so you hear that from Brian Stelter. Because the killer in Buffalo is an anti-Semite, that somehow means we shouldn't, or we need to consider that when we talk about how Israel killed a Palestinian journalist. That somehow has something to do with it. What exactly, I don't know, but according to Brian Stelter, it needs to be seen in its totality. That's somehow a part of it.
That's so unbelievably cynical, and yet it is completely believable because it happens all the time. Well, and they'll even accuse Bernie of anti-Semitism. There's no, it doesn't people who are Jewish or have had family members in the Holocaust who violence are smeared as anti-Semitic regularly, and it's such an insult to actual anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is very real, and it is a problem, and being upset about the killing of journalists is not anti-Semitism.
Yeah, and Brian Stelter, I'd love to hear him explain what a racist killer in Buffalo has to do with Israel killing a Palestinian journalist, and how possibly what kind of did anti-Semitism in the U.S. or elsewhere make Israel kill a Palestinian journalist? It's completely nonsensical. But hey, that's the world of the Sunday news shows, and that's why we watch them, so you don't have to here every week on Monday morning. Well, listen, that was great, Kate. Thank you so much for filling in.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
How was your first? This is actually the first time you've watched Monday morning. So how was that hour of Sunday news clips for you?
You definitely picked some real wild ones. I'm this may come as a surprise to listeners, but I don't actually watch 6 hours of these shows. I was joking, and I'm pretty surprised about I don't know, just how brazenly bad they are. Like, it's just, I mean, I thought bad, but this is even worse than I assumed.
And what a great way to start your week than with
yeah, happy Monday.
Happy Monday. Where can people find you?
So I'm on Twitter at Kate Willett. There's 2 T's in my last name. I have a podcast called Reply Guys, and we have some great guests on. Katie Halper's been on all the time. It's a leftist feminist podcast. And yeah, I have a book on Audible. I'm easy to find. I'm online.
What's the book called?
The book is called Dirtbag Anthropology. Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, listen, we're going to jump on Colin now. So if you want to join us there, the link is in the description below. And otherwise, thank you for joining us so much on Monday morning. If you want more, go to usefulidiots.substack.com. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.